There was a moment when the sky bled light. It was not the dawn. It was war. Wings beat against wings. Celestial fire tore through horizons that no human eye had ever seen. And in the center of that burning chaos, two forces looked into each other's eyes for the last time. One had been the most beautiful being ever created. The other was the warrior who carried in his name a declaration that no being in the universe could utter without falling to their knees. I will ascend to heaven. I will raise my throne. I will be like the Altissimo. 5 words that ignited the most devastating war of all eternity. The roar that pierced the heavens. The time was not the thunder of an ordinary storm. It was the sound of perfection choosing treason. And what fell that night was not just an angel. The innocence of creation fell. The illusion that beauty guarantees loyalty fell. And somewhere between the radiance and the darkness, between the holy mountain and the bottomless abyss, the story that has not yet ended began. This is that story. Before the dust from which the first man was formed existed, before the waters covered the face of the deep, and the voice of Dios broke the silence to order the light, there was already music. Not the music known to human ears, built upon strings and wood and the fragile vibration of air. It was another kind of music. It was the music of the beings who had come from the hands of the Creator before time itself had a name. They were the angels, millions of them, tens of millions. The book of Apocalypse describes them as millions of millions, a multitude so vast that no human mind can contain that number without feeling the vertigo of the infinite. And they sang. The book of Job records it with a clarity that stops one's breath. When Dios laid the foundations of the earth, when he stretched the line upon it and sank its pillars, when he placed stone upon stone in the foundation of the world that would be the home of his most beloved creatures, the morning stars sang together and all the sons of Dios shouted for joy. That was the universe's first concert, a choir of beings of light who opened their mouths and produced sounds that made the columns of eternity tremble, with the pure praise of creatures who did not yet know betrayal or pain or corruption. And there was one among them who was different from all the others. His name was Lucifer, morning star, son of the dawn. Those words were not empty metaphors. They were literal descriptions of what he was. The prophet Ezekiel, centuries later, would receive the revelation of what that being had been in his original state, and the words he wrote under divine inspiration have no parallel in all sacred literature. You were the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and finished in beauty. The seal of perfection. He was not simply perfect. He was the model upon which perfection itself was measured. He was the point of reference for excellence in the celestial realm. His wisdom had no known limit among created beings. His beauty was of a kind that no human word can completely contain, because human words were invented to describe the fallen world, and he belonged to an order of existence that did not yet know corruption. In Eden, in the garden of Dios, he was. That detail is extraordinary in itself. Before man was created, before Adam gave names to the animals and Eva walked among the trees of the garden, Lucifer was already there. His presence in Eden was not like that of the tempter who would come later. It was that of the glorious guardian, the representative of the celestial kingdom, in the place where Dios had sown his most precious plans for humanity. He walked through that garden with the authority of the highest being in creation, and the earth beneath his feet must have felt the luminous weight of his presence like one feels the heat of the sun before it appears on the horizon. And his clothing. The text of Ezekiel is extraordinarily specific on this point, as if Dios himself wanted humanity to understand how much was at stake when this being chose to rebel. Every precious stone was his clothing, carnelian, topaz, and diamond, jasper, onyx and beryl, sapphire, carbuncle and emerald and gold. 9 precious stones wrapped in gold formed his covering, 9 of the 12 stones that the high priest of Israel would later carry on his chest in the breastplate of judgment. It was as if a priestly function was inscribed into Lucifer's very garments from the beginning. He was not simply a brilliant angel. He was the angel who mediated worship. He was the heart of heaven's music. Each of those stones caught the light of the glory of Dios and refracted it into spectrums that filled the entire celestial environment with colors that do not exist in the visible spectrum of the human world. The workmanship of your timbrels and flutes was prepared for you on the day of your creation. Prepared for him. Not that he had learned to use them later. Not that he had developed that skill through effort and practice. From the moment Dios formed him, music was already in him as part of his very essence. It was as if Lucifer were a living instrument, a being whose entire existence resonated at frequencies that made the rest of celestial creation stop to listen. When he led worship, the entire heaven felt the weight of the glory of Dios in a way that only he could channel. The seraphim, who normally covered their own faces before the presence of the Altissimo, would lift their heads when Lucifer's music began, because in that music there was something that made the glory of Dios more accessible, more understandable, more intimate for all celestial creatures. He was the bridge between the infinite holiness of the Creator and the limited capacity of the creatures to absorb it. He was the anointed cherub, the great protective cherub, and Dios had placed him there. Those words are crucial. I placed you there. It was not an accident. It was not a cosmic coincidence. It was a deliberate and loving designation by the Creator for his most glorious creature. Dios looked among all the angelic hosts and chose him for the position of honor. He anointed him. He covered him with the anointing that signifies divine approval, special selection, and specific purpose. In the same way that centuries later he would anoint kings and prophets and priests among the children of Israel, Dios anointed Lucifer for a ministry that was unique in all of creation. On the holy mountain of Dios he was. In the midst of the stones of fire he walked. The stones of fire. That image both disturbs and fascinates. They were not ordinary embers. They were the visible manifestation of the consuming holiness of Dios. The Hebrew text suggests something like rocks of ignited fire, elements that burn with the intensity of the divine presence and that can only be stepped upon without devastating consequences by one who is in perfect communion with the one who dwells in devouring fire. And Lucifer walked in the midst of them without being destroyed, because his original holiness protected him. He had access to the most sacred place in the universe. He saw the glory that no other being had seen. He felt the heat of the divine presence on his outstretched wings every time he prostrated himself in worship. He was the being closest to Dios that existed among all creatures. He was the favorite, and he was perfect in all his ways from the day he was created. Perfect. That word carries a weight that crushes when understood in its context. It means there was nothing defective in Lucifer's formation. Dios made no mistake in creating him. There was no crack in his original character, no structural weakness in his nature that predestined him to fall. He was free, completely free. And that freedom, that supreme gift that Dios gives to his intelligent creatures, became the stage where the most important battle in history would be fought. The same freedom that makes genuine love possible also makes genuine betrayal possible. One cannot exist without the other, and Dios, who knew this before creating Lucifer, created him anyway. Because the alternative was a universe full of perfect robots who could never truly love. And that was not what the heart of the Eterno desired. For a time that the Biblia does not measure in years or centuries, but in eternity, Lucifer exercised his function. He led worship with a mastery that made the pillars of heaven tremble. The angelic hosts followed his movements with the confidence that only develops after countless cycles of shared worship. When he spread his wings and began to intone praise to the Altissimo, millions of angels responded in unison, and the resulting glory was so dense, so real, so luminous that it would have blinded any human eye the instant it was seen. The seraphim covered their faces. The cherubim bowed, and in the center of it all, with his garment of precious stones reflecting the flashes of the eternal throne, like thousands of simultaneous diamonds, Lucifer directed. He was the conductor of the greatest orchestra the universe would ever know, and in every note of that worship, there was an implicit celebration of the goodness of Dios that was real, because Lucifer himself felt it as real, until he stopped feeling it. But something began to change. It was not sudden. It is never sudden. The text of Ezekiel describes it with a precision that chills the blood. Your heart was lifted up because of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom because of your splendor. It was a process, a seed, a thought that at first was barely a whisper in the intimacy of his consciousness, so small that it could have been discarded in an instant had it been treated with proper humility. But he did not discard it. He held it. He contemplated it. He examined it from every possible angle, with that vast wisdom that made his analyses deep and persuasive, even when applied to the wrong purposes. He let it grow in the silence of his interior, like the root of a tree that no one sees, until the pavement begins to lift. The thought was this: I am beautiful. In itself, that observation was true. Lucifer was beautiful. But the difference between the truth that sets one free and the truth that destroys lies in what is done with it. The beauty that Lucifer had was a gift. It was a reflection of the glory of his Creator. Every flash of light that emanated from his garment was simply the glory of Dios passing through him like light through a crystal. He had not manufactured that beauty. He had not earned it. He had not developed it through his own effort or personal sacrifice. He did not deserve it any more than a diamond deserves to be more valuable than coal. It was pure grace. It was divine generosity. It was the result of Dios deciding, in the sovereignty of his love, to create a being who was extraordinarily beautiful. But Lucifer began to look at himself, and that look changed everything. When the gaze of a creature turns upon itself and begins to contemplate its own glory, instead of the glory of the one who bestowed it, something breaks inside that creature. Not immediately, not with a visible explosion. It breaks in silence, like a microscopic fissure in the hull of a ship that still sails normally, that still appears intact from the outside, that still fulfills its apparent function, but which inside is already compromised, already destined to sink if the fissure is not attended to in time. Lucifer did not attend to the fissure. He fed it with every new contemplation of his own splendor. You corrupted your wisdom because of your splendor. That phrase from the prophet Ezekiel is devastating in its depth. Lucifer's wisdom was genuine. It was vast. It was the wisdom of a being who had been present since the foundations of the world, who had seen creation unfold before his eyes like a tapestry of infinite proportions, who knew the mysteries of the universe in a way that no other creature could claim. But that wisdom began to corrupt, not because Dios corrupted it, not because some external agent poisoned it, but because Lucifer put it at the service of a wrong purpose, that of justifying his own ascent. Wisdom at the service of pride ceases to be wisdom. It becomes cunning, and cunning in the hands of a being as powerful and influential as Lucifer is one of the most destructive forces the universe can contain. No one in heaven saw it coming, or if they saw it, they did not understand it in time. Lucifer began to calculate. He sat in the places of worship, And instead of looking toward the throne with the reverence that for so long had been the center of his existence, he looked toward the throne with different eyes, eyes that no longer saw the object of his worship, but the position he believed he deserved. He counted the angels who followed him in worship and imagined them following him. He listened to the songs he himself directed and began to wonder, in that dark whisper growing inside him, how many of those songs could be directed toward him instead of toward the one on the throne. And it was in that moment, at that exact instant when calculation replaced worship in his heart, that Lucifer ceased to be the morning star and began to become something for which there was not yet a name. The book of Isaiah preserves the 5 declarations of that betrayal. They are the most terrible words a created being ever uttered. Each of them is a step toward the abyss, and each step is deeper than the last. And the most chilling part is not that he uttered them aloud before the celestial armies. The most chilling part is that he uttered them first in the silence of his own heart. He caressed them, refined them, and made them his own before turning them into a program. I will ascend to heaven. He was already in heaven. He already dwelt in the presence of Dios. He already walked on the holy mountain. But the heaven he referred to in that first declaration was not the heaven where he lived. It was the highest heaven, the place where only Dios dwells as absolute sovereign, the holy of holies of eternity. He wanted to ascend to where no creature has the right to ascend by their own merit. And that wanting, that desire to go higher than his created nature allowed, was the first act of rebellion, the first moment the creature declared that the limits the Creator had assigned to it were insufficient for what it believed it deserved. I will raise my throne above the stars of Dios. The stars of Dios. That is what he called the other angels. Those millions of luminous beings who had been his companions in worship from the beginning, his brothers in creation, those who had sung alongside him when the foundations of the world were laid. He looked at them now, not with the affection of a companion, but with the calculation of one planning his own ascent. He wanted to be above them all, not as primus inter pares, not as the first among equals who shares honor with his peers, but as absolute sovereign over all the creatures of the Altissimo. He wanted total dominion. He wanted every knee in heaven to bow before him. I will sit on the mount of the congregation, on the sides of the north, the mount of the congregation, the place of the divine assembly. He wanted to preside over the congregation of angels, not as a minister of worship, but as the object of worship. He wanted to take the place of the Padre. He wanted to be the reason the angels gathered, the center toward which all celestial gazes turned. Not Dios on the throne surrounded by worshippers, him on the throne surrounded by worshippers. The minister of worship wanted to become the recipient of worship. The bridge wanted to be the destination. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. Clouds in biblical language are frequently the visible manifestation of divine glory. The pillar of cloud that would guide Israel through the desert, the cloud that would fill the temple when Solomon dedicated it, the cloud that would cover the mountain when Dios spoke to Moses. The clouds of glory, Lucifer wanted to rise above them. He wanted to be above the glory of Dios. He wanted to surpass it, eclipse it, replace it with his own brilliance. He wanted it so that when the angels looked toward the heights, they would no longer see the glory of the Eterno, but the radiance of his own garment of carnelian and emerald and sapphire. I will be like the Altissimo. The fifth declaration, the most audacious, the most absolute, the height of cosmic arrogance. He did not want to be an assistant to Dios. He did not want to share the throne, as if there could be some kind of co-administration of the universe. He wanted to be like Dios. He wanted to equal the Creador. He wanted his name to be pronounced with the same weight, with the same reverence, with the same sacred fear with which the universe pronounced the name of the Eterno. I will be like the Altissimo. Those words are the heart of original sin, not the sin of man in Eden, but the sin before Eden. The sin that made possible all the other sins that the history of humanity would record, from that lost garden to the final chapter of time. And then he began to speak. Not just to himself, he began to speak to the other angels. The book of Apocalypse records it with an image that freezes the breath. His tail dragged a third of the stars of heaven, a third, 1/3 of all the angelic hosts. Millions of beings who had been created for worship, who had sung when Dios laid the foundations of the earth, who knew the glory of the Altissimo firsthand, listened to the words of Lucifer and chose to follow him. That number is incomprehensible when one stops to think about it. It was not a marginal movement. It was not a small group of dissenters on the fringes of the celestial kingdom. It was a third of the army of Dios. It was a fracture of cosmic proportions in the heart of the universe. What Lucifer must have said to them in those conversations, which the sacred texts do not record in detail, but which must have occurred in the luminous corridors of the celestial kingdom, can be reconstructed with disturbing clarity from the logic of his own rebellion. He would have spoken to them of his own excellence, presenting it not as vanity, but as an objective analysis of reality. He would have told them that a being as wise and beautiful and anointed as he deserved more recognition. He would have sown doubt about the motivations of Dios in keeping them in a position of eternal subordination. He would have promised them something that Dios, in his loving sovereignty, had denied them: absolute autonomy, the freedom to be their own gods, the possibility of existing without answering to anyone, without bowing the knee to anyone, without recognizing any being as superior. It was the same poison he would later offer to man in the garden, refined and adapted for a different audience, but fundamentally identical in its essence. You shall be as gods. Silence. And a third of heaven believed him. There were angels who chose to stay. There were angels who heard the words of Lucifer and felt the weight of deception in them, who recognized in those seductive arguments the bitter taste of lies disguised as enlightenment. There were angels who looked toward the throne and remembered who had created them, who had endowed them with life and light and purpose and meaning, and understood that no promise from Lucifer could surpass the reality of what they already possessed in their Creador. Those angels stayed. And among them, with the determination of a warrior who has found the cause worth facing everything for, was Miguel. Miguel. His name is a declaration of war and an answer at the same time. Mikael, who is like Dios. In Hebrew, 3 syllables that contain the definitive answer to all of Lucifer's pretensions. There is no one like Dios, not Lucifer, not any created being, not any creature that owes its existence to the will of the Eterno. Miguel's name was in itself a theological argument, a 2-word creed that completely dismantled Lucifer's program. And Miguel lived that name. He embodied it. He carried it not as a decorative title, but as a conviction that informed every decision, every movement, every breath of his celestial existence. Miguel had been designated as a prince. The book of Daniel calls him one of the chief princes, the great prince who stands for the children of the people of Dios. In the 10th chapter of Daniel, there is an extraordinary window into his character. When the divine messenger was sent to Daniel but was resisted for 21 days by the prince of the kingdom of Persia, it was Miguel who came to help him. Miguel, the first prince. He was a warrior in the deepest sense of the word, not a warrior who sought a fight for the love of violence or the desire to demonstrate his own power, but a warrior who understood that there are truths that deserve to be defended to the end. The holiness of Dios was one of those truths. The sovereignty of Dios was another. And when Lucifer began his insurrection, Miguel understood that the moment for which he had been made had arrived. Heaven was divided. It did not happen overnight. Lucifer's rebellion was not an instantaneous event, but a process that developed within the celestial kingdom, with a tension that must have been unbearable for all who lived through it. There were angels who doubted. There were angels who listened to Lucifer and then looked at Miguel and felt the weight of the decision on their outstretched wings, undecided between the brilliance of the promise and the solidity of loyalty. There were conversations in the luminous corridors of heaven that must have had the density of everything that is at stake when one chooses between good and evil, between worship and pride, between the creature that recognizes its place and the creature that rejects its limits. And every angel chose. Each one had to look toward the throne and then look toward Lucifer and decide which of the two they were willing to follow when it was no longer possible to follow both. Those who chose Lucifer did so believing they were gaining something: autonomy, the possibility of being more than what Dios had assigned them to be. Those who chose Dios did so, knowing they were losing the favor of the most influential being in the celestial kingdom, that they were placing themselves in the opposite trench from the most powerful, beautiful, and wise being that existed among creatures. And that difference says everything about the character of both sides. 2/3 of the celestial hosts remained faithful. An incalculable army, full of angels whose individual glory was enough to leave any human being prostrate on the ground in terror and awe, placed themselves under the command of Miguel. And on the other side, Lucifer formed his own lines. With 1/3 of the army of Dios turned into an army of chaos, with millions of luminous beings who had chosen treason over worship, he began to prepare for what would be inevitable: war. If this story is touching your heart and you want to continue journeying through the deepest and most powerful pages of the scriptures, subscribe now and ring the bell. Here, every narrative is a voyage through the eternal mysteries of the Word of Dios. And what comes next, in this cosmic battle between Lucifer and Miguel, is going to shake everything you thought you knew about the origin of evil and the destiny of humanity. The moment arrived. No one knows exactly at what instant of eternity the confrontation began. The Biblia gives no dates or temporal coordinates for the war in heaven, because the war in heaven existed outside of time as human beings know it, in a plane of existence where human chronology does not apply. But the book of Apocalypse does describe what happened with a clarity that leaves no room for speculation. And there was a great battle in heaven. A great battle, not a skirmish of limited consequences, not a localized conflict that was quickly resolved. A great battle. The original Greek text uses the word polemos, which denotes a war in its full, brutal, and real extent, with combat formations, strategy, maneuvers, and the total weight of each side committed without reservation to the clash. Miguel and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought. Two armies, two causes, two incompatible visions of the universe clashing on the terrain of eternity. One fought for the right of Dios to be Dios, for the holiness of the throne, for the truth that there is no one like the Altissimo. The other fought for Lucifer's right to dethrone Dios, for the autonomy of creatures from their creador, for the lie that the beauty of a creature can equal the glory of the Eterno. And the outcome of that battle would not only decide the fate of heaven, it would decide the fate of everything that existed and everything that would exist. It would decide the fate of a planet that had not yet been created, of a species that had not yet breathed its first breath, of a story of redemption that was still kept in the heart of the Eterno before the first words of Genesis ordered the light. The first clash must have been of a magnitude that no human description can contain. Imagine the meeting of two forces, each infinitely superior in power to anything humanity has known in all its history. Imagine millions of beings of light and fire who have been configured for this moment since before time had a name, each carrying in their being the energy of creation itself, moving in formations that obey a combat logic that no human military academy could understand. Imagine the sound of those wings spread in combat position, the flash of those swords of fire raised for the first time not for praise but for war, the roar of millions of celestial voices clashing in the eternal space where good and evil met face to face for the first time in open confrontation. Nothing in heaven had ever been like this. Worship had been the language of the celestial kingdom from the beginning. Song had been the mode of communication between creatures and the Creator. Heaven was the place where the peace of Dios reigned without opposition. And now that same heaven had become a battlefield. The same beings who had sung at the creation of the world now clashed in combat in eternal space. The same wings that had beaten in praise now beat in war. And the sound produced by that clash must have been the most terrifying sound the universe had ever heard, because it was the sound of betrayal meeting justice in a field where there was no possible arbiter outside of Dios himself. Lucifer's army fought. The sacred texts do not say they surrendered without a fight. The dragon and his angels fought. There was determination in their ranks. There was the fire of those who have burned their bridges and have no other path but forward. The fallen angels who followed Lucifer in his rebellion had staked everything on that moment. They could not turn back. They could not recognize their error and ask for mercy without renouncing everything Lucifer had promised them. Their pride was as committed to the battle as that of their leader, and they fought with the desperation of those who know that to lose meant losing everything. But they did not prevail. Those 4 words from the text of Apocalypse are of a crushing simplicity that contains an entire theology. But they did not prevail. There was no tie. There was no weary negotiation that divided heaven into zones of influence like a territory is divided in an armistice peace. There was no diplomatic solution that left Lucifer with a portion of the celestial kingdom as the price of his capitulation. They did not prevail. Miguel's army bent them, pushed them, crushed them under the weight of divine justice and the holiness of the army that fought not for the pride of its general, but for the glory of its creator, not for its own ambition, but for the eternal right of the Altissimo to be recognized as what he is. And in the center of that battle, the 2 greats met, Miguel and Lucifer, the warrior whose name asks who is like Dios, and the anointed cherub who had responded with his rebellion that he was, face to face on the terrain of eternity, with the fate of the universe suspended between their 2 opposing wills. Lucifer, with all his original beauty still upon him, with his garment of carnelian and sapphire and emerald, reflecting the flashes of the battle like a broken mirror that still catches the light, with corrupted wisdom burning in his eyes like a fire that no longer gives warmth but only consumes. Miguel, with the absolute clarity of one who fights in the name of someone greater than himself, without the burden of pride, without the weight of lies, with the terrible lightness of the warrior who knows that the cause he defends is just, even if it costs him everything. Lucifer spread his wings. They were the same wings that had covered the throne of Dios in worship for eternities. They were the wings of the anointed cherub, the protector who had walked on the holy mountain since before the world existed. But now those wings were spread in a sign of war, in a sign of defiance, in the final declaration of betrayal by the being who had decided that his will was more important than that of the Eterno. And in that instant, In that moment when Lucifer stood before Miguel, with all the darkness of his rebellion concentrated in that body that still shone with the residual light of what it had been, something happened that changed the universe forever. Miguel advanced, not with fury, not with the kind of rage that consumes the warrior who fights for personal wounds or offended honor. He advanced with the calm of one executing the sentence of a justice that is greater than any personal emotion. He advanced with the serenity of one who has received a mandate and fulfills it not because the battle pleases him, but because the truth he defends deserves to be defended. He advanced in the name of the one sitting on the throne. He advanced as the outstretched arm of the holiness of Dios, as the definitive answer to the declaration the universe had been waiting for since the first fissure appeared in Lucifer's heart. No one like Dios. No one. The answer arrived. The sacred text does not detail the mechanics of that final moment with the minutiae of a combat report, but what followed says it all. Lucifer was cast out. He was expelled. He was thrown out of heaven with the force of divine justice, like a healthy body rejecting the poison that has tried to colonize it. He did not go alone. He did not choose to withdraw with his dignity intact. The text of Apocalypse uses a verb that denotes violent action, a forceful throwing, an active and definitive rejection. He was hurled down. It was the end of Lucifer. And that great dragon was cast out, that ancient serpent called the Diablo and Satanas, who deceives the whole world. He was hurled to the earth, and his angels were hurled down with him. The ancient serpent. At that moment of his expulsion, the sacred text stopped calling him Lucifer. They stopped calling him the morning star. They stopped using the titles of glory that had described his original state, the names he carried when he walked among the stones of fire on the holy mountain. Now he was the dragon. He was the Diablo. He was Satanas. He was the accuser. He was the deceiver. He was the ancient serpent, carrying in that name all the memory of what he would do in the garden that was about to be the stage for his next move. The anointed cherub had died somewhere between the first declaration of pride and the last instant of that battle. What was hurled to the earth was no longer the being of light who had walked in the midst of the stones of fire. It was something completely different. It was the dark shadow of what he had been. It was the perfect corruption of the perfection that had existed. He fell. Jesus himself saw it. Centuries later, when his disciples returned excited, reporting that even the demons were subject to them in his name, he responded with a serenity that chills. I saw Satanas fall like lightning from heaven. Like lightning, the speed of lightning, the unstoppable trajectory of lightning, the sound of lightning, the darkness that comes after the lightning. That is how he fell, without the possibility of stopping, without the possibility of clinging to any ledge of heaven that could hold his fall. Like lightning, from the heights of the holy mountain to the depths of the earth that would soon also receive the human being the dragon was already planning to destroy. And his angels were hurled down with him. A third of the celestial army, now turned into a legion of the abyss, fell along with their lord. The demons that humanity would face throughout its history, the evil spirits that would inhabit the high places and the low places, the principalities and powers and rulers of the darkness of this age, the spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places that the Apostle Pablo would describe with that taxonomy of terror, all fell in that instant. They fell from honor to shame. They fell from light to darkness. They fell from worship to hatred. They fell from music to a roar. And they landed in a world that was about to receive the most dangerous being creation had produced. Silence in heaven. A moment of silence after the battle. A moment in which cosmic dust began to settle and Miguel's armies regrouped in the spaces from which the enemy had just been expelled. And then, like thunder following lightning, Like a voice filling all the space the cry of war had left empty, a proclamation the universe needed to hear. Now have come the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our Dios, and the authority of his Cristo. For the accuser of our brothers, who accuses them before our Dios day and night, has been hurled down. The accuser had been expelled. The one who used his access to heaven to present case after case against those Dios loved. The eternal prosecutor who pointed out the defects of the righteous with the precision of a being who intimately knew divine holiness and knew exactly what arguments to use to present humans as unworthy of the love of Dios, no longer had a place in heaven. He could no longer enter. The door had been closed behind him with the irrevocable force of Miguel's victory. And heaven, that heaven which for a time had known division and conflict and the sound of wings in war, belonged once again only to Dios. Rejoice, heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to the earth and the sea, because the Diablo has gone down to you. He is filled with fury, because he knows that his time is short. Great wrath. That was the state in which Lucifer arrived on earth, not defeated in the sense of resigned or pacified, defeated in the sense of furious. The humiliation of having been expelled from heaven before the eyes of all the celestial host, the shame of having been hurled down by Miguel with the force of the justice of Dios, the rage of a pride that lacked the capacity to recognize itself as wrong, because recognizing it would have required the humility he himself had destroyed within. All of that condensed into a wrath of incalculable proportions that would seek a place to discharge itself. And it found a place, a beautiful garden on a young planet, and two beings made in the image of that Dios whom he hated so much. Eden was the first consequence of the war in heaven. Lucifer arrived there as a serpent, cunning, patient, without the garment of precious stones he had worn on the holy mountain of Dios, without the outstretched wings of the anointed cherub, without the music inside him that had resonated since the day of his creation, stripped of all his original glory, reduced to crawling in the dust of a planet that was not his home. Lucifer entered the garden with the only treasure he had left, his ability to twist the truth until it became a lie. And he used it with a mastery that would result in the deepest catastrophe in human history. He found the woman alone by the tree Dios had pointed out as a limit. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil. A tree that in itself was not evil. A tree that was simply the visible expression of a sacred principle. There are limits the Creator establishes for his creatures, and those limits are an expression of his love, not his stinginess. Respecting those limits is worship. Crossing them without authorization is the very definition of what Lucifer had done in heaven. And he repeated the same argument he had used with the angels. He hinted to the woman that Dios had denied them something good, that the restriction on the tree was evidence of a hidden intention, that behind every divine command there was a selfish motive, the seed of doubt, the insinuation that Dios withholds something good. The suggestion that the love of Dios has hidden conditions and selfish purposes. And when the woman responded by explaining the divine command, Lucifer launched the final attack. You will not surely die, for Dios knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like gods, knowing good and evil. The same poison he had used with the angels. You shall be as gods. The poison worked in Eden as it had worked in heaven, because the heart that has not been anchored in humility is vulnerable to the lie that promises exaltation. And the man and the woman, like the third of the angels who had followed Lucifer in his rebellion, listened to the promise and took it. The fall of man was not an accident or a failure of divine design. It was the calculated revenge strike of a being who could not directly attack Dios and chose to attack what Dios loved most, created exactly in his image. Everything changed. Humanity entered history marked by the consequences of a battle it had not seen, wounded by a war in which it had not participated, but whose effects it now carried in its own body and soul. Generations of human beings were born under the weight of the curse that the serpent's lie had brought upon the earth. Suffering settled into the world as a permanent resident. Death entered for the first time into a universe where there was no place for it. The separation between the Creator and his most beloved creature became the deepest wound in all of history, and the fallen dragon observed all of it with the dark satisfaction of one who has managed to do harm where it hurts most. But Dios already had a plan. The plan was not an improvised reaction to the failure of Eden. It was an eternal plan. It was the response that was prepared before Lucifer's betrayal began, before the first whisper of pride settled in the heart of the anointed cherub, the Cordero who would be slain from the foundation of the world. Those words from the book of Apocalypse reveal something that makes one tremble. Before the world was created, before the freedom of creatures set in motion the sequence of betrayal and fall, the response to that betrayal was already in the heart of Dios, not because Dios had planned the betrayal, but because Dios, in his infinite omniscience, knew that the freedom he would grant his creatures could be misused, and he decided beforehand that the price of that bad decision would be paid by himself. That is not improvised justice, it is eternal love. The Cordero came. He was born in a manger in Belen, when the world was ruled by a Roman emperor who did not know that the most important story in the universe was beginning in a stable surrounded by animals and wrapped in ordinary cloths. He grew up in the obscurity of normality, in the house of a carpenter in Nazareth, in a region the sophisticated despised. Without the visible signs of the cosmic storm, his presence on earth represented, without the garment of carnelian and emerald, without music prepared in him since creation, without cherub wings or access to the holy mountain, just a man, just flesh and bone, just hunger and thirst and fatigue and pain. And in that complete and unadorned humanity was the definitive answer to the pride that had destroyed the most glorious being of creation. Satanas recognized him from the beginning. He who had been Lucifer, who remembered the heavens from before the creation of the world, had instincts that no accumulation of failures had been able to extinguish completely. And in that child of Belen, in that youth of Nazareth, in that preacher of the kingdom of heaven who began to gather multitudes on the shores of the Sea of Galilee, Satanas recognized something that filled him with a terror he had not felt for centuries. The temptation in the desert was Satanas's attempt to repeat with the Hijo de Dios what he had tried to repeat with all the sons of men. 40 days of fasting. The human body of Jesus weakened to the limit of what flesh can endure. And then Satanas appeared with his arguments, polished over centuries of practice on millions of human souls, sharpened with the precision of the most cunning being creation had produced. If you are the Hijo de Dios, tell these stones to become bread. Use your power to serve yourself. The same temptation of the anointed cherub. Use what you have to satisfy yourself instead of serving the Creator. Jesus responded with the written word, "Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of Dios." Satanas tried with power. "I will give you all the kingdoms of the world and their glory if you will bow down and worship me." The very heart of his own rebellion distilled into a direct offer. Worship in exchange for earthly power. Jesus responded, "Worship the Señor your Dios and serve him only." The same declaration of Miguel in the form of human obedience. Satanas withdrew temporarily, looking for a more opportune time, for the dragon is patient when it is convenient. The patience of the predator waiting for a moment of weakness. The moment arrived in a garden, Gethsemane, where the sweat of the Hijo de Dios fell to the ground like drops of blood while he faced the weight of what he was about to do. The weight of carrying all the sin of every human being who had ever lived or would ever live. The weight of the separation from the Padre that this moment required. The weight of the bitterest cup that existed. Satanas must have believed in that moment that he had an opportunity. The human body of Jesus trembled. The pain was real. And Jesus prayed 3 times asking for the cup to pass from him, but he concluded every prayer with the words that would destroy Satanas definitively. Not my will, but yours be done. Not my will. Those 3 words are the perfect inversion of Lucifer's 5 declarations. I will ascend, I will raise, I will sit, I will ascend, I will be. 5 affirmations of the self that destroyed the most glorious being. And in response to them, in the dark garden of Gethsemane, 3 words of the surrendered self that would save all of humanity. Not my will. The same battle of heaven concentrated into a prayer. The same point where Lucifer had failed, where his heart had chosen his own will over the will of the Creator, Jesus chose exactly the opposite. And that moment was the invisible defeat of Satanas before the visible cross consummated it forever. What came after was terrible and glorious at the same time. The betrayal of Judas in the garden, the denial of Pedro in the courtyard, the trial of Pilatus, who pronounced innocence yet decreed condemnation, the soldiers who wove the crown of thorns and mocked the King of the Jews, the cross carried on his shoulders through the streets of Jerusalem. The city that had shouted Hosanna 5 days earlier now shouted, crucify him. The nail in his hands, the nail in his feet, the vertical wood and the horizontal timber crossing at the point of convergence between heaven and earth. The body of the Hijo de Dios stretched between both, as a bridge between what Lucifer's rebellion had separated. Satanas must have thought that was his greatest victory. He was wrong. The 3rd day changed everything. When the stone was rolled away by the angel of the Signor, with the roar of the earth trembling beneath his feet, when the Roman guards fell like dead men from terror, when the cloths of the sepulchre were left folded neatly in the place where the body had been, when the angels, sitting one at the head and another at the feet, proclaimed, "He is not here. He has risen." The cry that heaven had launched after Miguel's victory found its definitive echo on earth. The blood of the Cordero had paid for what Lucifer's rebellion had cost. The death of the just had rescued the unjust. The apparent defeat had become the most absolute victory in the history of the universe. And they overcame him by the blood of the Cordero and by the word of their testimony. The final destiny of Satanas is written with the same clarity as his origin. The book of Apocalypse describes it without possible ambiguity. The Diablo, who deceived them, was thrown into the lake of burning sulfur, where they will be tormented day and night forever and ever. Bull, the anointed cherub who walked among the stones of fire on the holy mountain of Dios, will end in the lake of fire forever, not as a ruler or as the prince of darkness, as a prisoner, as the being who chose betrayal over worship and harvested exactly what he sowed, multiplied by eternity. The war that began with 5 declarations of pride will end with a declaration of eternal justice. And the new heaven and new earth that will come after will no longer know any shadow of that war, any echo of that conflict, because the one who started it will have been removed forever from any space where the love of Dios dwells. But that is the story of Lucifer. The story that matters now is yours, because the same seed that destroyed the most glorious being ever created remains active in the heart of every human being who has breathed from Adam until today. It is not called cosmic rebellion. It does not wear a garment of carnelian and emerald. It does not utter its declarations in the luminous corridors of the holy mountain. It is called by humbler and closer names. It is called Me First. It's called My Life, My Rules. It's called I owe no one anything. It is called no one tells me what to do. It is called I will be like the Altissimo, uttered not in the heavens before angelic armies, but in the silence of the human heart, every time a person decides that their desires weigh more than the will of Dios, that their plan is more important than the Creator's plan, that the cup Dios offers them is not the cup they want to drink. The same sin, the same root, the same consequences. Lucifer did not fall because he was evil in the beginning. He fell because he chose poorly when he was perfect. And that is precisely the deepest warning his story contains for every human being who hears it. Beauty does not protect against pride. Intelligence does not vaccinate against rebellion. Talent does not guarantee humility. A privileged position does not ensure faithfulness. Lucifer had all of that and more, and yet he chose to place his own will above the will of the one who had created him. The lesson is not that Lucifer was different from other created beings. The lesson is that Lucifer was the most powerful and the most brilliant, and yet he fell, which means no one is automatically safe just because of the gifts they possess. But there is another lesson, equally important, equally urgent, in the story of Miguel. Miguel saw Lucifer in all his glory. He knew him. He knew what he was. He knew how powerful he was. He knew that a third of the celestial army had been convinced by his arguments that the most brilliant among creatures had yielded to the logic of pride that Lucifer presented. And Miguel chose to bow his knee before Dios anyway. He chose humility when pride was the available and tempting option. He chose obedience when autonomy was being offered and celebrated by a third of his companions. He chose to fight on the side that no one predicted would win with the ease it won. And when the moment of battle came, Miguel did not fight with his own strength or in defense of his own honor. He fought in the name of the one sitting on the throne. That is the difference that defines everything. The story of Lucifer versus Miguel is not just a battle between two celestial beings in a past so remote it seems irrelevant to the daily lives of human beings today. It is the map of the battle fought every day in the heart of every person who exists. Every time pride says, "I deserve more," and faith says, "I trust in your plan," it is Miguel versus Lucifer. Every time bitterness says, "I have the right not to forgive," and love says, "As Cristo forgave me, so I also forgive," it is Miguel versus Lucifer. Every time self-will says, "No one commands me," and the surrendered spirit says, "Your will be done," it is Miguel versus Lucifer. Every time the human heart looks at itself in the mirror of pride and begins to think it deserves more than what Dios has given it, that its limits are unfair, that its will should prevail over the Creator's, that same fissure that appeared in Lucifer's heart is appearing again. The battle did not end when Lucifer was hurled from heaven. It changed its stage, and the stage now is you. The same Cordero whose blood was the key to the victory proclaimed in heaven after Miguel's battle is today the source of the only victory possible in that inner battle that no human being can win alone. There is no willpower sufficient to pull out the root of pride we inherited as a consequence of the fall Lucifer triggered and Adan in Eden confirmed. There is no spiritual discipline that by itself eradicates the tendency to elevate the self onto the throne where only Dios has the right to sit. There is only one answer that works, the same one Jesus uttered in Gethsemane while his sweat fell like blood on the ground of the dark garden. "Not my will, but yours." That surrender is not defeat. It is the only real victory available on this side of heaven. Lucifer chose his will over Dios's and fell like lightning. Jesus chose the Padre's will over his own and rose like the light of a world that has not yet seen its best dawn. The invitation of this story is not to admire the battle from the spectator's stands. It is to choose what kind of being you are going to be in it. The one who bows the knee where Lucifer refused to bow it, or the one who repeats on a human scale the same declaration of pride that destroyed the most glorious cherub of creation. The book of life exists. The throne of Dios remains. The victory of the Cordero is real and complete and is yours if you receive it. And every soul that chooses to surrender to the Lordship of Christo instead of exalting itself is repeating Miguel's choice. To fight on the right side in the most important war of eternity, with the right weapons, under the banner of the only one who deserves eternal victory. The story began before time existed. It will end when time ceases to be. And in the middle of that immense and incomprehensible story, at this exact moment of this journey, is you, with the same freedom Lucifer had, with the same call Miguel answered, with the blood of the Cordero available to clean everything the rebellion has soiled, to restore everything pride has broken, to take you back to the holy mountain where one walks among stones of fire without being consumed, because the one who walks there goes by the hand of the Eterno. Heaven is watching. And the most important decision of this life is not any of those the world presents as great decisions. It is only one: to imitate the cherub who chose his own glory, or to imitate the Cordero who chose yours. Choose wisely. Time is short, eternity is long, and the same voice that resonated in heaven after Miguel hurled the dragon out continues to resonate today for every heart that wants to hear it. Now have come the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our Dios. Not yesterday, not tomorrow, now. If this story touched your heart, write in the comments, "I choose the Cordero."